We are very, very excited about today, especially because we have one of the pretty much the finest speakers I've listened to. She's very humble, but indeed she is a very, very fine speaker. And I'm also more excited because there's a lot of practitioners who have signed up for this conversation today. And I'm very, very, very certain that this is going to change the game for you. First, in the sense that it would elevate the way you think about, metabolic health, weight health, altogether, but also the insights that you tend to get, especially from someone like Ashley, who has spent, over the past 2 decades doing this. I like to say for her likes, they've seen it all, or almost all. So it'd be really, really nice to hear from Ashley. And also it's generally fun speaking with her, just exchanging ideas and seeing things from, diverse perspectives, especially for you know, an aspect of health that is as complex as, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other metabolic syndromes. So we're very excited for that. We're going to just give this another minute so that more people join in, and then we will kick off. And while we're doing that, um, uh, in the next 1 minute to start, and then I can introduce Ashley, and then we can get to it.
And then just to set up the context, Chidozie and I will be co-hosting Ashley and asking questions. And I think what's really fun about this group is Ashley will have this clinical in practice experience. And then I'll also get the chance to ask Chidozie some questions more from like a microbiome scientist experience. And then we'll kind of blend those together. And I think, that's kind of the perfect marriage to understand this very complex problem.
And we're leaving plenty of time for questions. So we definitely let's cooperate to graduate. I love hearing how you guys are doing things in practice, things that have worked for you. And also, because I learned from you all. And also, if you have specific questions, we would love to answer them.
Exactly. So whatever you guys want to drop in the comments, feel free to do so as we're talking. And then when we get to the latter portion, we'll just start going through the questions together.
Amazing. Okay, we have just 30 more seconds. Call your friends, tell them to join in. We're about to start. This has been recorded, but life is always more fun than the recording. So let's get to it.
I'm so curious, for the chat, like since we have a second before we get started, if you can drop in, since it's all practitioners here, I'm curious who is currently using gut health testing to guide their recommendations for patients on GLP-1 agonists or weaning, or just sort of in that part of the weight health conversation. So if you are one of those people, if you're already practicing that way, I would love to hear from you in the chat. Just say hi. Yes, I am. Hi, no, I'm not. Like Luz Chacon, thanks. I saw you in there like tempted.
Yeah, actually, you're right in the sense that like it's maybe not the most obvious thing to do, right? When practitioners are pulling in what tests do I need to be using when I have my clients on these different drugs. Yeah. So super excited to get to that because it could be very pivotal for the clients, and we're going to talk about why.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
I think we can get to it now. Again, guys, I'm very, very excited to welcome every single one of you. Please also let us know where you're joining in from. And today we are joined by my friend, an incredibly brilliant woman, Ashley Koff. Ashley is the founder of Better Nutrition Program, popularly known as BNP. She's a nutrition director for UC Irvine's Susan Samuel Integrative and Functional Medicine Fellowship. And she is the author of an upcoming book, Your Best Shot. We are really expecting that one come January. Ashley's going to be telling us a little bit more about that shortly. Ashley has been a practitioner for over 25 years, and she's leading a transformative movement in personalized nutrition, turning better, not perfect, choices into practical, sustainable strategies that deliver real health outcomes. I think this is one of the fascinating things I like about Ashley. It is that she understands the power of personalized nutrition, personalized medicine. She understands that we as human beings are very, very complex, and the way we should administer health should indeed be personalized, listening to the whole person before we do the administration of health. So through patients' stories and personalized experience, she shows that optimal health is not just possible, it is essential to living your fullest life. Ashley has been recognized as one of CNN's top 100 health makers, featured in InStyle as Hollywood's leading dietitian and as Westin's global nutrition ambassador. Whoa, 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 whoa. Ashley, I feel much hotter here. You're welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I love that I'm getting to connect with you guys on this part. And Chidozie's brain is a brain I love to pick. So Linda, I'm just jealous of your role in this because I have a lot of questions, but I'll let us dive into it, and maybe my questions will come up by way of somebody else too in the Q&A.
Absolutely. Okay, Ashley, let's dive into it.
Yeah.
I want us to start from the beginning of the beginning. When we think about metabolic diseases today, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other syndromes, especially for those of us who are living in the US and Canada, it feels like things are at a pandemic level. All right. When you think about that, especially because you've been around for quite a while, and I'm really curious to know, have you seen the graph go up this way? And if that's been the case, what are your thoughts? Why do you think we are really dealing with something as complex as this in today's world?
I will take the accent and the smile to acknowledge that, like, I'm the likely the oldest one here in the group, but I have been around for a while on that part. And this really comes back to this is very personal for me. I was on antibiotics from birth, and I was always deemed the healthy one, but I had ear infections and throat infections, and I also had a belly, and the belly was real cute, until maybe around like 11, 12. And then the belly was, it was fat, and you were like, there was, teasing, you're a fat girl, or, this kind of thing. It was just always this belly. And it wasn't really until my early 20s that all of that kind of coincided with an understanding that it was tied to my gut health. That took some pursuit, and certainly is how I ended up in my career. But it wasn't until 2005 for me that tied into very specifically why it matters so much in my gut. And that was that we have these weight health hormones in the lining of our gut. And that has been, so that we're going on about 20 years now, that has been the aha and the focus of my work. So we're going to talk about weight health hormones and the fact that they regulate our weight health, and that weight health is actually a key performance indicator. Our weight composition is a key performance indicator of our overall health. So what I actually think is that the way that we have talked about weight and the diagnoses around weight are so fundamentally wrong that they have ushered in decades of problematic identification, problematic diagnosis, problematic relationship with our own bodies, that we're at this like really, really exciting inflection point. So even when we look at the charts and where the charts are, I think they're actually not useful in an understanding of what has happened societally. And the biggest way that we can think about this is that our bodies are an ecosystem. So everything that's happening in our body is happening based on, in an ecosystem, you have organisms, and then you have their interactions, their interdependency. So every choice that is made has impact, throughout that ecosystem. So yes, one could absolutely look at, increases in diabetes, or in both in the number of people diagnosed, and then also in the ages at which we're diagnosed. We could follow a chart about obesity, but obesity itself, by definition in the US, is extremely problematic because it's defined by weight for height. Obesity has created so many problems. We haven't been looking at weight composition, right? And we haven't said, hey, when your weight composition, again, which is regulated by your weight health hormones, causes changes in your fat, your bone, your muscle, where those are allocated, and your cravings and inflammation and all these other things. So when we look at the charts, I think the charts are part of the problem, right? Which is the problem of then the recommendations are part of the problem. Then who gets access to care is part of the problem. So I'll stop there. I think that there is no question that if you look at availability of knowledge and resources, we should be so much healthier as a society than I was in 1973, 75, like in my early years. And we're actually so much more unhealthy, both mentally and physically. And so what that says is that the big problem is we just have not been looking at and treating the body, that the resources and all this stuff, we're not in the right place. Yeah.
Actually, it's fascinating that you say that, because as I was listening to you, and I love the fact that you started from the beginning of the beginning, because it all goes back to definition. What do we actually call things? What's the appellation that we attach to them? Because if we do not define things correctly, how do we even make an effort to try to solve those problems?
Right.
But then the other thing I think about when you said that, the other thing I thought about was this actually presents an opportunity for practitioners who want to take an holistic approach to health. So when you think about weight, I mean, there is, there's a lot of things going out there, but from a classical perspective, weight is connected to almost everything from, caloric intake to, we are seeing that there's some sort of hormonal imbalance there that's happening, to energy imbalance, genetics, all of these things make it complex. How does this tie into the way you actually administer health, given how complex this is?
Yeah, it's complex, and I don't want to diminish the conversation around complex, but when we understand the interdependent nature, it actually becomes much simpler. The complex part is trying to fit a very simple solution into a system that doesn't work. So we have obesity medicine, we have gastroenterology, we have cardiology, but we all know that we have neurology, and then we have psychology. And we all know that microbiome goes across all of those. So if we come in and we say nourish the microbiome, it's actually super simple. But if we try to say in obesity medicine, how do we assess and nourish, and like, where do we put that in? Like, that's where things get stuck. So for all of us here, I think probably anyone who's attracted to this conversation is some degree of a root cause practitioner. So functional medicine, lifestyle medicine, integrative medicine, et cetera. It is actually very simple. Like when we look at, when we assess an individual, we want to understand, first of all, you are not what you eat. You're what your body actually has access to and can use. So if we are an operating system as a body, if we are an operating system, it needs to be optimally resourced. So we need to have what it needs to be where, from a need standpoint for the body, we what the body needs. We need it to have it when it needs it, where it needs it, in a form it can use it, and then it needs to have the capability of using it, right? So when we look at that, it's actually so much more simple. It's not complex. What it helps us to understand is in any of those spaces where there's suboptimal function or there's suboptimal resourcing, the body isn't going to work better. So one of the reasons that we have so many problems today is that we have these, what I call really dumb amounts. We have this history of setting like RDAs, like recommended dietary amounts, or now the dietary reference intakes. And those are therefore suboptimal function. So if the body is under-resourced anywhere, and we'll get to capable of using it in a moment, but if it's under-resourced anywhere, then what ends up happening is the body has a super efficient system for prioritization. It does not care what your hair looks like. It really doesn't care what your physical energy is. It doesn't care about your skin. It probably doesn't care that much if you have like muscle cramps or other things. It cares that your heart pumps, and it cares that it's breathing. Like, so it's going to prioritize, in a very Maslow's like needs, just function on that part. So our job is to help somebody understand when the body is suboptimally resourced, it's going to prioritize those things and deprioritize other things. When deprioritization occurs, disease and symptoms occur, right? Symptoms occur first, and then sort of it rolls into disease typically. And then there's this other side, which is we can optimally resource the body. We can get it everything it needs, et cetera, and have it be able to use it. But then if it gets to a place where it can't actually use it, it's in a form it doesn't recognize, or the critters aren't there to actually do what they're supposed to do, or there's leakiness, so things are going away even though they're coming in, or any of that stuff, then that's going to be that final phase of, of suboptimal function. So it's actually pretty simple, even though the system is complex. And I think nature provides us a great example of it. I hear this often. I just think it's like such a, I think it was on one of my tea bags, it was like one of those, when you get those like sayings, and it was, nature doesn't hurry and it gets everything done. Or it might be like, if you're trying to have a garden with, to grow flowers or grow food, and you're only watering it and it doesn't have any sunlight, or it's only getting sunlight and it doesn't have water, like it's not going to work. And the human body is the same way. So I think our first job for anybody who's a root cause practitioner, like all of us here, is to help people understand that we're talking about optimally resourcing a system. And there's a variety of ways to do that. But the way that we do that is we actually assess the system's function. So where I think one of the bigger issues today that we have is we have a population, this was not the case in 2000 when I was first starting my practice. We have a population of individuals and practitioners who are extremely knowledgeable. The problem is their insight insufficient. They don't know what their body actually needs. That assessment hasn't occurred, but they're hearing information, they're acquiring knowledge about, protein, we need 1 gram per kilogram, or we need 1 gram per pound, or, whatever on that part. But they're like, wait, hold on a second. I don't actually know if my body is actually using the protein that I'm currently taking in. So that's where I think the rubber meets the road for us. Yeah.
It is really, really fantastic insights, because this goes back to whole body health, how everything is interrelated. And you're right. For example, the microbiome is a powerful modulating factor for all forms of health. So it's really important for practitioners to really understand how the different components actually presents what we see as a phenotype of obesity or overweight or whatever it is that we call it. I'm talking about that optimization. Now we are beginning to see, because you just spoke about the human biology. Now, in situations where there is some sort of insufficiency, we are beginning to see some sort of exogenous support, one of which is, the elephant in the room, GLP-1. A lot of people are doing, GLP-1 arid drugs. I'm really curious to know how, when you think about the emergence of this tool, because that's how I consider it to be a really powerful tool. When you think about the emergence of this tool, how would you say that has shaped the way you practice and attend to weight health in the last 5 years? On the research front, we've been researching about GLP-1s for much longer, but now we're beginning to see them more come into clinical practice. I want to get an insight into how that has really changed the game.
Yeah. So as I said, for me, it changed the game in 2005. So we're going back on that part. And sort of myself and pharma and surgery went on different paths, or I would say sort of medical practice, went on different paths. I became obsessed when I saw my first couple of bariatric patients with the fact that there are these hormones, right? These incretin hormones, and learning about those and turning around and saying okay, so these actually this is where the impact is. So if the gut lining is suboptimal, or if there are challenges in the microbiome, these are going to be things that we need to address on that part. Pharma was like, oh, this is so interesting. And so let's start to look at, if we know that these hormones work, let's look at how, let's let's look deeper at these hormones, and ultimately arrived at a Gila monster and was like, oh, this Gila monster happens to have in its venom, it has a hormone that looks like our human hormone, but it doesn't degrade at the pace that ours does. Ours degrades within 2 to 4 minutes. That one was staying around for, about 30 days, right? So it's interesting to see that side. And so that's synthetic hormone replacement. And then of course there was surgical, the surgical interventions that could optimize the hormone. But I was like, couldn't we be optimizing our own hormones? Or said differently, and I think this is what is really the change that I want everyone to grab onto, is that we're burying the lead if we talk about the medications, these hormone replacements. So GLP-1 agonists or dual agonists and now triple agonists. If we look at those and we say that they are responsible for massive change in society. Yes, there are 10 to 20 million people who have experimented, and are using, I shouldn't say experimented, who are using and are using the medications, and their behavior change is spurring tremendous change. So I don't want to diminish that. There's changes in caloric intake, in food products, all sorts of different things, right? Questioning the end of obesity, again, defined as weight for height, on that part, and looking at just weight loss, not weight composition. But that's bearing the lead. What is big and massive for all of us, and what has changed my practice wholeheartedly, is I can actually now talk to people. We have weight health hormones. And if their function is suboptimal to any extent, then it is going to be because they regulate your weight health, which is a key performance indicator of your overall health. If these regulators are functioning suboptimally, we have to dive in and understand where that optimization is being compromised, and we can optimize that function. We may use a tool, we may use a calo-curve, we may use a GLP-1 probiotic, we may use all of those. We may use a GLP-1 agonist. We may use cold plunging. We may use nutrient optimization. We may use fasting. We can use all these different things. If we optimize weight health hormone function, then the system works, has a fighting chance at working optimally. And I think what the big thing for all of us here is to have that be the takeaway. The takeaway for all of us in our practice is not only do our patients, would they be open to a conversation and understanding and hearing about that we actually have weight health hormones, that our genetics come into play. The way we are uniquely designed comes into play with how these particular hormones may be working in our body, that our life choices are impacting, and that our historic life choices have impacted their production, et cetera. That's massive. So we have 20 million, maybe we'll get to 30 million where, agonist usage and et cetera. We have 350 million as the population of the US. 93% are deemed, and this was before COVID, before the pandemic research, deemed metabolically unhealthy, and looking at, the metabolic health by way of metabolic syndrome. So in terms of lab data on that part, I would proffer that at least, I don't think people have gotten a lot healthier, since then. So let's just say we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 90%. We're talking about 300 million people that likely have some degree of suboptimal weight health hormone function. And one of the tricky things for us is to also know that it is not something, we do not have a lab test today where we can go in and test your GLP-1, your GIP, your PYY, your CCK. So it's not just GLP-1 and GIP, but we do have microbiome assessment. We do have lab data. We do have digestive, we have breathing exercises and breathing data. We do have questions we can ask individuals about their lived experience with their own satiety and with cravings. And we have some other things. So we are able to assess weight health hormone function, and then we can optimize it. And that's our power here. So to me, what it should be shifting for everyone, sometimes I describe it as, of course, since I have a book coming out, but I'm like, it's any book cover. It doesn't have to be your best shot. This is a book cover for having a metabolic health conversation, or this is a book cover for having a root cause medicine, holistic. I want to treat your body this way. So the change in practice is we have the opportunity to teach people that we want to go from, there's a lot of stuff we want to unlearn. Then we go to assessment. Then we go to personalization of your plan through optimization, and optimization is ongoing. That's actually how we're going to get and keep you healthy. And that it's not about, the conversation today is not about choosing sides. Are you yay or nay, an agonist in that way?
Absolutely. As you were speaking, I started to think a little bit more about this approach, because everything ties back to really understanding systems, figuring out insufficiencies, building that insufficiency back. And one of the key systems that is very central to this is the microbiome.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe we should get to it. I know Linda has some questions there, but I think I'll lead with a quick question to you. When you're looking at the microbiome in the context of weight health, and feel free to do this high level, what are the key things that matter to you the most in the context of wanting to optimize weight?
Yeah. Years ago, I used to do these going to the sources. It was long before reality TV, et cetera, but going to the source segments for Good Morning America. And I went to Brazil, and I went to a sugar farm that had called Native, and they had historically been a regular cane. And, cane is like slash and burn, and it's like real bad, on the environment. And it took them 20 years, pivoted to a biodynamic farm. And one of the interesting things about the biodynamic, I walked into this room on the biodynamic farm as I was running away from, they literally had an anaconda there. So I'm like, I'm not good with snakes. So I'm like, I'm running away. And I walk in, and there were these groups of the local townsfolk, because the farm also used from the cane, they were able to extract energy and create power from it, right? So they were in there they were breeding termites, all these different kinds of termites. And the idea was that one of the most destructive things for cane is a particular type of termite. They release that termite, that particular type, but they release 47 other types of termites, so that particular one, what they knew was that one needs to be there, but it needs to be there in this small amount. And then it needs all these other ones, right? So at the same time, I was also working with Procter & Gamble, and it was the launch of a line. And I was really excited about bifidobacteria, right? This was like, I had the years, lactobacilli had changed my life. And I was, so excited about that part. But this was in strain specificity and understanding Infantis, and like diving in, on that part. And I was like, oh my God, this is the aha about the microbiome. At the same time, when I became a dietitian, I also, in my residency, worked in the burn unit. And when a patient comes in and burns, and actually even if they're lucky enough, while they're in the ambulance, we go insane high doses of glutamine, because glutamine is the glue that comes in and glues the lining of the digestive tract. So I'm having all of these three conversations. And I also knew that I had previously sold sugared cereals, because I worked in advertising and helped create Raisin Bran Crunch and Smart Start. And I just saw it all. I was like, I understand what's happening. When we look at this, we come in and we can't just focus on, and keep in mind, this was at the time when we really only thought about the tube. We didn't understand the actual critters and the metabolic activity and how it all works in the actual lining of the tract. We'll talk about that later. But it enlightened for me how we have to think about the tube and what is in the tube, and then the integrity of the tube. And that tube starts the moment that I'm breathing, right? That I'm taking anything in, and the importance of oral microbiome, and, going all the way through on that part. And so I think what I take away from that conversation is, remember, weight health, it's an ecosystem. We now know that the regulators, if you will, or what I call in my book, the switch. So I call because they switch on and they switch off, these at least these four, but GLP-1, GIP, PYY, CCK, they're made and deployed from the lining of the digestive tract. If your lining is not optimally functioning, that's going to be a problem. And when we go through the list of everything that insults and injures the lining of our digestive tract, I don't care what you're doing with your critters, like in the tube. If the lining, the integrity of the lining isn't there, we're going to have a problem, right? But then within the tube, we want to start to look at, and we want to avoid a conversation of insufficiency or deficiency, and really look at overall balance, because excess is as much of a problem as insufficiency or deficiency, right? And we see that, like, why I love the Vitract test. Like when I'm in deep gut in there and I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, I can see, why is this overproduced here, right? And one of my favorite things is like getting on a call with you, and whether with a patient or not, or any of your team members. I happen to be like, Chidozie, I need to talk. Like, so we're on that part, but is looking at that and saying like, hey, I don't want to go in and just give like, and come in and be like, oh, I'm going to give bifidobacteria, or I'm going to do go on an antibiotic and clean everything out, or I'm going to use these compounds and get rid of this stuff. I want to come in and be like, why is this out of balance? And what's the better approach to restoring that balance? Because these critters are like, it's an ecosystem. So I would say probably the microbiome is that sub-ecosystem within the larger ecosystem. And if we treat it as individual parts and we don't respect an ecosystem, we're going to miss the forest for the trees, which is a good ecosystem analysis and analogy on that part. Yeah.
Love it. One of the questions I would love to dive deeper on is, a lot of practitioners who are using the Vitract gut test join these webinars because they want to get a sense of experts who are using these tests. How are they thinking? You have a patient that walks in through the door. How are you using the test to either assess or change the way that you are sort of modifying their treatment plan?
Yeah, I love this question. And if I gave a one answer, like I always do it this way, everybody should hang up and not listen. Like, so in the era of personalization, you should never have a protocol where you do the exact same thing for everyone. Like on that part. And here's where I'm going to totally undo what I'm talking about. I'm always going to do an assessment of the actual individual first by way of questions, right? So by way of gathering information about them and their lived experience and some question, in that part. And yes, I know we have things called intake forms or sharing labs or getting data or any of this other stuff. And sometimes they come to me with, and this is like, I know exactly where I'm going when this happens. Ashley, how soon can I see you? I've had a food allergy test. I'm allergic to absolutely everything. And it's basically saying like, I can't eat anything that I'm currently eating. And so I just need to see you because I need to know what to eat. My doctor sent me over and I was like, okay, let's breathe. First of all, if your system is irritated, it is going to present as irritated by anything that's going into it. So when those come into me on that part, I'm always going to have that initial conversation, and that's going to have me beeline over to, let me understand your digestive history. Let me ask questions. Let me, dive into that part. So most of the time, I'm not recommending labs out the door until I've understood where somebody is. And that's like, there's a whole practice, and many of my colleagues practice this way, where they're like, I'm genetics first, I'm genes first before, and we just debate all the time. I'm like, I'm digestion first. Because for me, if it doesn't matter to me what all of this other stuff is until I know, do we have an operating system that is going to be effective at being able to use and deploy and do all this stuff that it's supposed to do. So where the Vitract test comes in, or where gut testing comes in for me, is usually in the place where I have a patient who will come and out the door, like we're having a conversation. I'm going to make this specific to weight health just because, it's sort of the conversation in here. I'm experiencing, I'm really struggling with belly fat and inability to lose weight. I'm eating right. I'm exercising, we kind of go through those pieces. I experience digestive complaints either on the regular or at very specific times, either in their cycle or, with certain things on that part. And then additionally in that piece where sometimes also people come to me and they're taking a lot of supplements, and I'm like, hold on a second. I don't necessarily think that the supplements are actually being used, or if there's an inconsistency. For example, I take all these supplements and I have low levels of this, or I have high levels of this, like if I see B12 and folate are really high in the blood, I'm like, why isn't it getting absorbed? So that starts me down the digestive path in that way. So I'd say that those are probably the instances. And maybe there's a third, which is if somebody has done a direct to consumer test that I think is garbage, then sometimes I'll come in and be like, hey, can we start with something that I think is better? Because I think you've gotten data, but we don't actually have good data. And that might be another reason on that part.
Yeah. And what's funny, we have a geneticist with us on the call.
Yeah.
I talked to Chidozie about this, and something interesting that he said to me once was like, yeah, your genes are what they are. And what makes it meaningful is your microbiome can turn on or turn off those genes.
Yeah.
And your life is determined by gene expression, whether certain genes get expressed or they don't. And that's why microbiome is so pivotal. Chidozie, just going over to you for a second, can you talk a little bit about microbiome signatures that maybe can be used as biomarker to stratify responders versus non-responders of GLP-1 drug treatments? Do we have that kind of information yet?
Yeah, good question. First, I think about the microbiome as the master modulator of almost everything, including metabolic health. And in the context of weight, there are definitely very strong signatures in the gut ecosystem that we should be looking at. So the way I think about it usually is I think about the microbiome signatures that can actually help to improve weight, to help manage weight, whether it's weight loss or weight composition, that's your goal. And then the other events that are happening in the gut ecosystem that can actually make it difficult to achieve your weight loss goals. And I think it's important to kind of like clarify these things. So in the context of how the microbiome can actually enhance weight loss, we've seen this very well represented in literature. And we've seen this in some longitudinal studies, some of these studies observational, but we've also seen in some placebo, double-blinded, placebo-controlled studies. First, the microbiome modulates weight from the perspective of short-chain fatty acids. And I know that a lot of people here are familiar with butyrate, but in the context of weight health, it appears that the short-chain fatty acid that actually tends to play a bigger role is propionate.
Yeah.
Now, we all know that, when you take dietary fiber, they're fermented, and then you're producing these short-chain fatty acids, propionates, butyrate, and acetate. Usually that happens in a ratio of 60, 20 to 20. 60% of that is propionate. Now, one of the interesting things that we know is that propionate actually serves as a ligand to bind the receptor that is found on your L cells. For those of you who are here who probably don't know what these L cells are, they're pretty much specialized cells that are found on your gut lining. They're spread across your gut lining. You find them around the basolateral membrane of your gut lining. Now, when you're producing sufficient propionates, because they are ligands that can bind to these receptors that are found on your L cells, we call them the G protein coupled receptor, they activate GLP-1. So propionate is a GLP-1 receptor agonist because it binds it and it activates GLP-1 production. And that's why it's unsurprising when you see in literature where you can actually use the microbiome as a prehabilitator before you start administering weight health treatment.
Yes.
For example, we have seen that people that have high prevotella to bacteroides ratio, and this has been recapitulated across over 3 clinical controlled studies. People that have high levels of prevotella in comparison to bacteroides are more likely to lose weight. Actually, a very interesting study that was published in 2020 by a fantastic group did show that those that have the prevotella enterotype who were administered with high fiber diet and whole grain diet did lose weight by 3.5 kg over a 24-week period versus those that had a bacteroides enterotype. But I want to take a step back to think about why that is the case. Well, the reason is because Prevotella is a well-known fermenter of dietary fiber to produce propionate. And by producing propionate in the colon, it increases its access to bind to these receptors that can activate GLP-1 synthesis. Now, but it's important to step back a little bit to think about what these enterotypes are, because I want this to be as practical as possible for the practitioners who are here. When I think about where the microbiome is going in terms of how it can modulate weight health, we know that the microbiome has, if you look at every person's microbiome, they fall into three key enterotypes. So we'll talk about two because the two are the more important ones to this conversation. So we have what we call the Prevotella enterotype, and we have what we call the Bacteroides enterotype. Now, the Prevotella enterotype, we tend to see this in people who are doing a lot of plant-based carbohydrates. So foods that are rich in arabinose islands, pectins, usually would enrich Prevotella. Now, in fact, if you look at the genome of Prevotella, you would see what we call the polysaccharide utilization loci. It's different genes and gene clusters that are able to break down different forms of plant polysaccharides. So if you're prioritizing that, your Prevotella levels will be high. Linta and I know someone who is like a classic vegan, and everything he's doing is plant-based. He did a Vitract microbiome test, 65% Prevotella. And that was unsurprising, all right? Now, versus Bacteroides, which we tend to see to be enriched in people who are doing animal fat, animal protein diet. Now, because we have seen repeatedly that Prevotella enterotypes are more likely to lose weight, then for a practitioner, it might make sense to start thinking about how you can actually try to start shifting your patient's gut microbiome profiles to more like a Prevotella enterotype, just so that you can increase the chances of seeing success with treatment. Now, for those who have done Vitract microbiome tests, we tend to see in people who are doing omnivorous diet, up to 20% of their gut made up of Prevotella. In people who are mostly vegetarians or vegans, we tend to see closer to 30%. So that's one way that I think about it on how microbiome can actually improve or modulate weight health. Ashley was talking about something really remarkable. She was talking about glutamine and how she would, employ glutamine. I want to talk about that really briefly. So one of the key things that glutamine does, just like zinc carnosine, it helps with repairing that gut lining. And this ties to weight health in a remarkable way when you think about it in the context of the microbiome. Now, we do know, and this is very, very well established, that excessive lipopolysaccharides in circulation can actually dysregulate glucose metabolism. All right. And so one of the things that we also tend to see is when you have high LPS levels, they increase intestinal permeability, what some of us here call leaky gut. And then all the proteins that actually help to keep that tight junctions tend to dwindle. All right. So it makes a lot of sense that you're introducing glutamine, because what that does is that it creates an environment that makes the oxygen gradient in that gut ecosystem ideal for the beneficial organisms and prevents the overgrowth of organisms like the lipopolysaccharide producers. So for you as practitioners, one of the ways you can also think about modulating the microbiome is when you do a Vitract microbiome test, for example, you want to see the levels of the Proteobacteria species. It's a phylum of organisms that has over 140 genera. They're producing LPS. The lesser the LPS, the more likely it is for you to achieve your goal, because now you're not going to blunt maybe GLP-1 activity or tyrosine, peptide tyrosine, or etc. Yeah, so these are kind of like the fundamental ways I think about them.
Would you I would add to that one bifidobacteria. I know we've talked a lot about that in that part, but I think that there's all this attention given to Akkermansia, and I think there's a lot of warranted attention given to Akkermansia. But for me, I look at bifido like when there is suboptimal levels of bifidobacteria, I want to understand why, but I also feel that almost always aligns for me with a patient who is having weight health challenges, and very often too, where they're expressing with, some of the digestive issues on that part. What's your thought on bifido?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Bifidobacterium adolescentis, for example, is very well known to be a propionate producer. So it still goes back to that metabolite propionate.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
and Bifidobacterium longum as well. We do know that acetate and butyrate, which Bifidobacterium longum produces, we do know that they also activate GLP-1 synthesis. So Bifidobacterium longum also plays a key role. So it makes sense that you're looking at Bifidobacterium as a keystone species that you want to see in that gut microenvironment.
And I think we're going to learn more too as more attention, as more research. So again, like popularity of these drugs is spurring a lot of research, but GLP-2 is really interesting as it relates to the integrity of the mucosal lining. So really looking at that piece. And again, too, looking at then what is also promoting the production of GLP-1, the secretion of GLP-1 too on that part. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think the other thing also to think about in the context of the last statement you made is, what are the things that are activating or that have the potential to actually activate GLP-1 production? Because that should be the goal. How do I enhance endogenous, production of GLP-1? All right. And one other thing that we have also seen, and the microbiome plays a remarkable role here, is your bile acid pool, right? I know a lot of people, when they think about bile acids, they just think about them in the context of lipid metabolism or the absorption of maybe fat-soluble vitamins. But it's beyond that. When your bile acids are produced, of course, we do know, so I'm backtracking a little bit now. We do know your bile acids are produced from cholesterol in your hepatocytes. They're released into your intestine. But when they are released, we do know that 95% of them, after deconjugation, are reabsorbed. The question is, what is the fate of the remaining 5%? Well, your gut microbes bioconvert them. So the bioconversion of your primary bile acids to your secondary bile acids is very critical to weight health, because we've seen that especially conjugated secondary bile acids are very potent activators of GLP-1 synthesis, because they can bind, receptors, like TGR5, which is also a G protein coupled receptor. And so when I think about this in the context of nutritional medicine, I start to think about how can we nutritionally manipulate our gut microbiome such that we can skew it, all right, you can skew the bile acid tone, to that can actually activate TGR5. And there are interesting studies where, some of these things have been tried. One of those is they have tried to, I think this is interesting, where they try to pair like a high-fat diet with a viscous fiber, just so that binding can drag it, across the intestinal, as it transits through your intestinal lining, just so that as it transits through your gastrointestinal tract, and reduce the tendency of deconjugation. Because what you want to reduce is, we know that a lot of them are deconjugated, but we know that the more potent activators are the conjugated secondary bile acids. So if you compare those, we can reduce some of those premature deconjugation that happens in the small intestine and deliver more of the conjugated bile acids to the vicinity of the colon, where they can be sensed by your L cells and likely trigger that activation of TGR5. And I think that that's fascinating. In fact, a very fantastic group in 2020 did a fascinating study where they did a direct supplementation through, it was through the encapsulated secondary bile acids. And they did a direct supplementation through your ileocolonic route, colonic route, 23 participants. And what they did see was supplementation with bile acids through direct supplement route did reduce, not only did it reduce weight, it increased GLP-1 synthesis, PYY was also increased, and that also corresponded with weight loss. And this was done with, this is a fantastic study because it was done in vitro, ex vivo, and with 23 participants. Small study size, but it just speaks to how bile acid tone plays a significant role in weight loss.
And I feel like I think one of the questions that came up out of this that I'll just sort of like leap into as a follow-up on that part is so like practical application. So there is no question to me that the usage of testing to optimize for this is absolutely critical for anyone who is achieving a goal or for any other reason is needing to come off of a GLP-1 agonist. And I'm going to start there because there's this like statement that you have to either stay on the medication forever at the same dose and it's not going to have an effective outcome. That exists because yes, unless you have fixed the underlying problem or unless you have optimized, you may not be able to fix, but you may be able to have significantly improved it. So in order for somebody to start what I call in my practice, what I reference as a weaning time period or, moving over into maintenance, this is a really applicable space. And then being able to reuse testing. One of the reasons I like the doability of the Vitract test and the cost is that I set my patients up for an understanding that we are going to use this frequently, that this will be something that we're comparing against. I do, for a lot of the reasons you were also talking about, I also believe in testing before somebody goes on an agonist or as we're onboarding you before we're increasing your dosage significantly. That is going to help me mediate quote unquote side effects, which are, they're not side effects, they're exposing what was suboptimally functioning or where those challenges were in the ecosystem. And then outside of that, this is this assessment and being able to use this to understand is a great place for where we're saying like, hey, I don't actually think that the agonist is the tool that we're starting with from a weight health standpoint, whether that's choice, that's that's access, that's anything else. I actually think we've got good indication and information as a result of also having this test that we can optimize. And now we have information about how to directionally optimize and be able to, support you from a weight health standpoint where we know that there's so many different places we could go, but even just understanding the microbiome's impact on bone health and looking at the ability to actually feed and optimize the microbiome so that bone reabsorption occurs. There's so much to that, right? So there are patients that I have where our sole goal right now is actually osteoporosis or, looking at how we're going to optimize bone health. Which is a huge part of weight health. And we're not having an agonist discussion. And I'm using the microbiome testing there as well.
No, it's fantastic that you mentioned that, Ashley, because butyrate, for example, actually enhances the solubility of calcium ions, which is very, very key for bone health. And that's one thing that we tend to see in that age group. Typically we see really low levels of this butyrate producer. So by doing a test, you can see those signatures and then you can say, okay, I want to supplement this. I want to target this and increase those species in that gut microenvironment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just as a quick summation of what you guys were saying earlier, there's been a lot of supplementation and when we're looking at short chain fatty acids with butyrate, right? Like everyone's talking about it, but people don't really talk about propionate as a supplement. Is that something that practitioners who have their clients on GLP-1s should be thinking about?
So I think it's interesting in all of this, like we're talking about weight health hormone replacement. So replacement is going to be, it's at a very high amount. It's staying on, for the, like in our case, like it's 24/7, right, as opposed to the shorter time period. So typically I want to I don't want to miss the steps in propionate. Like for me, I want to work through that. I'm saying that as somebody who has not jumped into using that from a supplementation standpoint. I probably will, I can appreciate as more of this conversation and more of the postbiotics and more of the supplementation is becoming available, that there may be patients where going to the end game and genetics could certainly factor in here, on that part. But I think you miss too many steps is what I would say. Like, I think you're going to miss out on, remember, it's an ecosystem. And so if you just drop in that, in that space, I don't think you necessarily are getting to resolving dysfunction or really optimizing on that part. Yeah.
I completely agree with you, Ashley, because there are also some factors, things like age and all that, that could even play into why maybe a preparedness supplementation will work in one group versus another group. And there's actually an interesting study that did this. It's Gary Foster's group in 2015, where they they supplemented with inulin propionate esters. And the goal was, of course, to deliver propionates to the colon. And this was a double-blinded study that they did. And they delivered this to middle-aged adults that were overweight. And they did 10 grams of that inulin propionate ester supplementation for about 6 months. And then what they did see was that it did lead to increased insulin sensitivity, weight loss, PYY increase, all of those markers that you want to see. However, what they did was 6 years later, they did that same experiment on young adults, changing nothing, and there was no significant difference in weight loss. So it goes back to what you're saying, is that you have to be very attentive to the whole body, understanding the different intersections, the things that could actually make, the fact that it worked in this group does not necessarily mean that it would work in the other group. But how do you know that if you don't pay attention to these, nuanced factors? Another interesting thing we've seen also, is with even with the bile acid pool. Some people are taking lots of probiotics, but some probiotics actually have, strains that have high bile salt hydrolase activity. Now, if you are doing some sort of treatment that relies on your bile acid pool to actually, activate GLP-1 synthesis or to increase its persistence, if you're supplementing with those kind of probiotics, you're going to be deconjugating most of the bile acids that you actually want conjugated to activate. So it's important to just pay that attention. So I completely agree with you with that on that front.
And we probably see it, I think the thing, other than just protein generically, I think the other conversation in weight health today that is one of the most exciting ones, but is also one that I think is being mismanaged in the communication, is creatine. So when we look at, and I'm going to tie this over to why you want your gut health test, because the conversation started off with creatine and awareness, and we're learning, we thought about creatine for muscle. So first of all, we thought about, creatine as don't take it like that. It's, this is a steroid, we shouldn't take it. And then you're like, wait, hold on a second. It's 3 amino acids. We should totally, the body brings these together, and then, the creatine kinase breaks it down, and we've got these phosphates available. And this is so helpful in terms of ADP to ATP and all of this great stuff. And now we understand that for the brain, the brain is so metabolically active. And it's if there's ever a place that needs energy, it's not even our muscles, it's our brain. And let's look at this. But what we're hearing now from very, significant voices is oh, hey, we should go from 5 grams to now we should go to 10 grams. And now, I heard somebody the other day, 20 grams, and by the way, these are just blanket recommendations, not based on age, not based on what somebody has going on cognitively, et cetera. And if we just look at a finished product, and remember, there's no way, the body does not say, if I have enough creatine, then I'm going to break apart any extra creatine. And that's great because I'll use methionine over here and I'll use arginine over here. No, it does not break back down that compound until it goes through, any remaining is a waste product, right? And needs to be eliminated on that part. So it's not like you have a storage of these amino acids, on that part. So what I want us to understand in a person is, why is the body at suboptimal amounts for that person of creatine? So the propionate conversation here is, I can absolutely supplement with propionate in the way that I can absolutely supplement with creatine. But before I go to that end game, especially at a higher amount, I don't think anybody's going to have a problem 5 grams, I shouldn't say anyone, there might be some, but most are 5 grams, maybe 10 grams on that part. But I want to understand, and to understand that, I have to understand the liver and the kidneys and the microbiome, because what is going on with creatine kinase, and where how am I able to have methionine, arginine, like those amino acids? My microbiome has to make them accessible to me, whether I'm taking them as an amino acid or whether I'm eating them. And then they have to get bound together to make, the body makes the creatine. So I need that from a liver standpoint. Then they have to be able to be that creatine needs to be transported to the brain. Then we have to have optimal creatine kinase that's available and able to be broken down. This is an ecosystem. And if we just answer with connection. Okay, good. If we just answer with the end game on that part and we don't come back to is the microbiome in a position to be doing all of this part, we're going to miss something along the way. And the concern I have with is the question mark of the excess of the creatine there, right? So I think, yes, like, and I bring that one up with weight health because so many people are having phenomenal weight health outcomes and cognitive outcomes, which we love, as in relationship to creatine. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to then just keep having the question of, is more creatine better, right? We really want to look at, why do we have suboptimal, like, is it suboptimal formation, or is it suboptimal deployment, or is it, a variety of these things. And that always brings me back to the microbiome, because we're talking about amino acids that need to be brought together. And that's the job of the digestive system on that part.
No, it's remarkable, Ashley. It's remarkable. I love the way you think about it. If there's anything anyone will take out of this place, it is to remember that it is whole body health. You're optimizing different components. You have to listen to the body. You have to, your symptoms are really not your enemy. They're trying to tell you something. You have to listen to them. You have to try to figure out the things to optimize. And then, like Ashley said, this whole big thing that looks complex can become simple. And Ashley, again, this is one of the reasons I actually really enjoy speaking with you, because I know you're a clinician, but you have a scientist mindset as well. So it's like you're able to take that step backward to think about things from a mechanism of action perspective, but to then know where to incorporate that in clinical practice, because we can't think about these things in isolation. I know I can keep talking on and on with you. I know there are a couple of things we wanted to do, but because of time, Ashley, do you have any, parting words? Please, I would like you to talk a bit as well, even if it's for like a minute or two, about your book. There are a lot of practitioners here who would love to hear about it, as you just give us your final words.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So my final words are, and I saw someone's note in here, I get that we all know the problems and we all know the pathways. I want to empower you to be able to make that connection so that your patients get it, right? And I think one of the things that I love about Vitract, and I especially love about these kinds of conversations, is that when we look at a test and we see a lower level of something or a higher level of something, the fix is not always to up a level by adding it as a supplement or down, or take away supplementation. Yeah. So I think my parting words there would be like, I love your summation and your like in the test and all of those pieces, but also remember that Vitract offers you the opportunity to talk to clinicians, and they also have a new AI that you can go in and you can be like, hey, what are some things I could take away from this? Like, it's kind of, like the way that my brain is working in that part. To that end, I also, because this is really important to me, wanted to make sure that you and your patients have access to the first ever weight health hormone assessment. It didn't exist. I've created it. This is what I've been using in clinical practice for 15 years. That's available at thebetternutritionprogram.com. It's free. You can have your patients use it and use it for reassessment. And in doing that, it's going to direct you to what you want to look deeper into. In particular, it's a great complement for somebody to be using that while they're waiting for their Vitract results, to come back. And to do that reassessment, as we talked about on the agonist. And then, yes, Your Best Shot, my book. And Chidozie, I'll just put the word "the" at the front of, so it's the Better Nutrition Program. I think Better Nutrition Program also goes to us, but it's fine on that part. My book comes out January 6th, but we are, I'm doing 1 hour live sessions starting next week, where we're going through this and we're helping with that weight health optimization. So if we can support you, if we can support your practice, whatever it is, please just reach out, or If you have a podcast or if you have an email list or if you have any of those things, I'm super grateful for any support, and likewise would love to share what you all are doing, and be able to, I think, as I said in the beginning, this is about cooperating to graduate. We all learn and can optimize, and do protocols better together. And if I didn't answer a question or you had a burning question, please send it over either to Vitract or to me, and we'll get those answered. Is that fair?
I think that is. Ashley, thank you so much for your time. This was a really, really fun conversation. I love the fact that we went through it right from the beginning and discussed different components of weight health. And I also want to thank the practitioners who have joined this conversation. We're going to make this recording available to you guys. You can find Ashley and her team at thebetternutritionprogram.com. We are lucky to have direct access to her. So please, you guys, reach out. Ashley is fascinating. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you.
And my co-host, Linta, thank you as well.
Yes, Linta. Yes, Angela.
Thank you, guys. I really enjoyed this. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.